So I am competitive. I'm sure that shocks some of you. Those who know me well know I'm very competitive. Well, in the seminary, I had a good buddy of mine. His name was Luke. He was in the seminary with me for 5 or 6 years, and eventually he left. He's married now, doing great. He and his wife are awesome, and I wish I saw them more because they live in Illinois. But anyway, Luke is a good friend, and he's kind of one of those people that just is good at everything. Kind of makes you mad. Right? Like, can't you just not be good at one thing, you know? In particular, he's very smart. He always did very, very good on his exams, and you know, for me, I wanted to beat him just one time. So one day I got my exam back in the seminary, and I did great, 99%. And I'm thinking, today is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice, you know? I'm finally going to beat Luke. So, you know, I put a smile on my face. I looked at Luke, and I show him my exam, and I'm ready for him to, be disappointed. So he just looks at me, smiles, kind of smugly, I think. Pulls up his exam, 100%. This guy. Who does he think he is, you know? Well, those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and I was humbled. It's always good when the scriptures are very clear about what the Lord wants us to pray and reflect on. And that's certainly the case this weekend. It's all about humility, right? The Lord wants us to pray about being humble disciples and what it means to be a humble disciple. Humility is one of those things, though, that we probably should define, because I think at times we think it's just being self-deprecating or being a doormat for others, and it's just not those things. I propose to you that humility is first and foremost being honest with oneself. Being honest with yourself about who you are and your strengths and your weaknesses. Being honest with oneself. And then the second aspect of humility is to see the good in others. To be willing to see the goodness in others. And seeing their goodness is not a threat to yourself, right? You know? So, why is it so hard for us to be humble? I think there's 3 great threats to humility. And each of those are an O word, so the 3 O's that are a threat to our humility. O number 1, this innate desire in us to outdo one another. I was at dinner the other night with a couple of families. We had a great time. And one of the gentlemen he said, "Father, I'm a Cleveland Browns fan." And I just looked at him and I said, "Oh, you poor thing." Kind of like I'm more superior than I'm a Lions fan. Maybe joke's on me. I don't know. Now, all kidding aside, we do that all the time in society, where we look at other people, other groups of people, for very different reasons, whether it's a political party, a different religion, and we see them as inferior, right? There are many ways in which we look at other groups of people as inferior, and we as superior. It's a great threat to just living the Christian life in common with one another, but obviously we will never be humble if we live with this constant desire to outdo, to be superior than the other. What's the second O? The second O is this, it's similar, but it's a little different, this desire to outperform, to always be better, like the things that we do are always better. An example that I will use here, you just imagine 2 football players, 2 quarterbacks. I know I'm obsessed with football right now. I apologize. I just can't wait for 2 weeks from now. But anyway. But imagine you have a high school quarterback, senior, been the starter for the past 2 years, and you have a sophomore quarterback. And the senior he's experienced, he's good, he's just not as talented as the sophomore. But the sophomore probably won't start because he's just not experienced yet. Needs a little bit more seasoning. Well, here's the problem. Sometimes what happens is the senior has a chance to be a mentor, But where it really goes poorly is if that quarterback says, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can to outperform him. So much so that I'll sabotage him. I won't help him with the playbook. I won't help him in practice. In every way, I'm going to celebrate his mistakes, and I'm going to do better. Here's the problem. That way of living sometimes works. Sometimes it does. It helps us do better and puts other people down. But here's the other problem. It may work for that year only, for that football team. But the very next year, that sophomore quarterback will not be ready because his mentor failed him, right? How destructive it can be when we desire to outperform one another. Now, I have to say, I was tempted to use the Green Bay Packers as an example here, but I didn't, just for Colton. You know, big Packer fan over there. But anyway, I told him I'd shout him out in the homily, so. The third O. It's the one that we really hear in our gospel, this desire to outdistance ourselves from one another. Now, Jesus talks about this very clearly in the parable, right? You go to a wedding feast, you want to put yourself in the place of honor, you want to be a special guest. And so you sit over there where all the good people are, where you kind of separate yourself from the people over there where the bad people sit. Not you, exactly, you know. You're good. But, you know, when you put yourself with a special guest, you've created this distance, this chasm between those who are special and those who aren't so. Well, we do this in so many ways, where we distance ourselves from one another. You can call that the keeping of the Joneses mentality, or I have a better job than this person, or whatever. But there's many ways in which we distance ourselves from one another. So what's the answer to these three threats, to these three O's? Well, in the seminary, we always joked with one another that if you didn't know the answer, just write Jesus. You're probably right. And that's what I'm going to tell you to do. Just say Jesus, because that's the answer. Jesus Christ is the answer. You could also go to Mary as the icon of humility, but for today, we're going to use Jesus. Why? Well, think about that first O. The desire to outdo, to be superior than another. What does Jesus do? Jesus humbled himself and took on the form of a slave, as we heard from St. Paul in the letter to the Philippians. Jesus humbled himself and took on our nature. He became like us. You know, God could have just not done that, but he didn't. He became like us to lift us up and to bring us into and to help us, to bring us into his divine nature so that we could live with him in fellowship. Jesus humbled himself, not as someone superior, but he became inferior for our sake. What about outperforming? Have you noticed in the Gospels that every time Jesus is at his best, it's when he makes us better? Every time. Every time Jesus is at his best, it's when he's doing something for us. Whether it's teaching, whether it's healing somebody, or these great miracles, it's always about making us better. Those who are humble people will be desiring to help make other people better. Then the last one, outdistance. Again, this is similar to the first one, but what we celebrate at Christmas is what we're celebrating today, in a sense, with the gift of humility, which is, thank God that God wanted to close the gap between us and him. One of the great problems for the centuries before the incarnation was that God was other and transcendent and not relatable. And then here comes Jesus, closes the distance between us and God, and makes God relatable, makes God concrete, makes it possible for us to have a relationship with our God in a much more intimate way. So the answer, my friends, is to imitate Christ. If we want to be humble disciples, it means we have to be humble disciples of Jesus. And so, when we go back to that definition of humility, to know ourselves as we truly are, that's the answer, the antidote, if you will, to the desire to outdo, right? When we know ourselves as beloved sons and daughters, we see one another as beloved sons and daughters. And we want to elevate people like Jesus elevated people into that dignity. We think about what's the remedy for outperforming others? Well, being like Jesus. Rather than desiring to be better, we make others better. We assist them and make them better and help them, just as Jesus did. And rather than perpetuating the distances between divisions of humanity and all these different ways which we can say you're other and you're not a part of my life, to close the gap. I was walking yesterday and I saw the Be Nice van, which was notice and invite. Right? Notice those who are maybe isolated. Notice those who maybe are different or other. And invite. Invite. So if we're going to be humble disciples of Jesus Christ, it means that we're going to allow Christ's grace to help us stay away from those 3 O's and to elevate, assist, and bring together God's people.